Hi, and welcome to a special episode of our Experiencing Consciousness podcast. We are
Roxanna Erickson,
Catherine Rossi.
and I'm Jan Lipa.
We are so happy you are here.
The last time what happened is we were when we were talking on the meta level, it came out that all of us are a bit different. Each of us is a bit different from all the others in terms of style, in terms of ways of working, and so on. So the question came out: how do you actually create your own personal style of working with all these tools? And how do you decide between if go more into the direct, indirect, or formal, informal kind of style? So what's your personal way of working? What's the personal style, and how did you came to it? I would say, is this still a proper way to put it and a good topic of conversation?
I think it's good. Yeah, I think that's a good intro, and I think it'll be a really nice conversation.
Okay, cool.
Well, and it's important, I think we've actually already begun. And the thing is to discover like who you are and why you approach things the way that you do. And where did that come from, so that you can be your own person. That the thing is that we can try to imitate somebody, but ultimately we can only be ourselves. And so how is it that you got to where you got to? And Jan, I am so curious about you.
Well, before we start this, I just want to say that when you said it, what it all reminded me, it can be a good beginning of the conversation, is there was a part of there's a series of lectures or seminars with Dr. Erickson, which is called the In the Room with Milton H. Erickson, MD, and there was a part of it, a fragment, where one of the participants asked him, who do you recommend to go to learn the techniques of hypnosis? And then Dr. Erickson said something like, the first place you go to is develop your own technique. And he said, don't try to imitate me or my cadence, or anyone else's. And then he goes, I seen dozens scores of men trying to imitate me. That's a hollow pretense. It's a mess. So, and then he goes that it's very important to develop your own style, and then he goes, you talk slowly, do so. You talk rapidly, do so, but don't imitate, So I would say that he also puts a lot, judging from this quotation, this quotation, that he would also be underlying the importance of being yourself in this process. And well, since you asked me, which is difficult thing to, I like asking questions. It's
I know, that's why I'm asking you.
Way more difficult to answer them. But let me try. Well, I think, well, my first contact with hypnosis was totally not because I was interested in psychotherapy. I was 13, I believe, when I saw a magician in a TV. So there was some kind of program or something like that, where some guy, a British guy, was putting people in a trance, like this stage kind of hypnosis, and telling them to do all kinds of crazy or stupid things. And I was generally fascinated by, the fact that I was like sitting there and I was like, you can actually do something like that? How is that even possible? So I was fascinated with the phenomena itself, that someone is like, normal person standing somewhere, and then suddenly someone does something, and you suddenly think to yourself that you are, like, for example, there was one, they were doing a lot of totally strange things. Someone suddenly thinks that he has some kind of boundaries from magnetic field and cannot move beyond certain circle or something like that. And I was like, how the same person was standing there like a minute ago, and he was or she was thinking that everything was okay, and suddenly there's this sudden alteration. So I was fascinated by that. And then there was a person, there was a therapist in my hometown. It's a small town, so I was like, I knew some people, and a friend of,
Zakopane.
yeah, exactly, in Zakopane, and a friend of my mom was a therapist, and he was using hypnosis, Ericksonian style. He was kind of mixing Ericksonian hypnosis with NLP and all that kind of things. It was in the 90s. And he was doing hypnosis. So I went to him and I said, I've heard that you're doing hypnosis. And he said, yes. So I go, so teach me how to do it. And he goes, I will not do it because it's very dangerous and you can harm someone, and it's very difficult to master it. So I walk out of his office, and I'm thinking to myself, it's difficult. That means it's a skill. You need to master it. So it's good. And actually this is obvious to me because I cannot do it, and most people probably can't. So it's good that it's a skill and that you can master it, because that's good. That's going to be an advantage. And then if he says that you can harm someone, that means that it works. So that was how I reframed that. And then I went to a school trip to Krakow, and we had like an hour and a half or something like that free time on the main market. So I went to a bookstore and bought some kind of handbook of hypnosis, one of those books, that they say, learn how to do hypnosis in a week and became very successful and rich, that kind of, handbook. But what was there actually were very simple kind of sets of inductions. So I started practicing that on my friends, and then they were very direct and everything. And I read there that in order to be successful in hypnosis, you need to be seen as authority. So the best way to do it, as they say, is to tell people from the beginning that you really know your thing. And so me, being 13 years of age, I was telling my friends, also 13, that yeah, I do it for like many years, and no one even asked, no one was ever trying to verify that. And we were like doing all these funny experiments. We were watching those programs, and we were like, oh, he was able to do it in such a way that he puts a coin on someone's head, hand, and then suddenly that person feels that the coin that the coin is starting to burn them, and he kind of puts it away, and there's a burn mark or something like that. So I read it somewhere, and when we go, so who do we do it to today? So we were experimenting with things like that, and many times nothing happened, but sometimes it did. And I was kind of, in this way, I was familiarizing myself with deeper and deeper trance phenomena. And pretty soon, when you are kind of exploring that kind of field, sooner or later, in one way or another, a name Erickson, particularly Milton H. Erickson, comes out. So it came out to me pretty early in the process. And then these were the times when in Poland you didn't have any resources on that matter. Fortunately, I knew English pretty well, so I asked my older brother to bring me some of the books from England. And he brought me the books of Dr. Erickson, and I started reading the original material, the books done with Dr. Rossi. And then that hit me so hard. So I was like, and the difference was that suddenly I was reading about something that was actually useful, not only interesting, but useful, that you can. And so I was like, and I was at that time, I was already in psychotherapy. and I was sitting in the office with the therapist doing nothing as usual, as usually you do in those classical psychotherapies, you know. And then suddenly you read about Erickson and you go like, that's the way you can do therapy. So you can actually do something. There is a possibility of actual change, and it happens like this, you know, in that interesting manner, using those tools, this hypnotic. And this was the way I was introduced into the indirect and strategic forms of therapy, and I totally fell in love with it.
But I would say, Jan, that all along that your way was strategic in that when you looked at these possibilities of trying these things out, of putting a coin on someone's arm, you know, seeing what happened and whatnot, that there was a certain strategicness to it, that you do this and then you do this and then you do this. And because you are very strategically oriented, and you know, you can change your way in half a second if the way that you're working doesn't seem to be fruitful. But there is something about step by step, how do you learn this? It's fantastic.
Well, what I'm noticing is that you were driven by curiosity,
Yeah.
and that you chose to learn experientially. So you're curious about this, you let your mind wander, you dive in and try it out. Then you've got another foundation to step forward on. So you really, as Catherine says, you really move forward step by step
Yeah.
in very experiential, expansive way. That's charming to hear. And really, it's interesting to hear that your first influence was stage hypnotist. So many of people who end up as responsible, scholarly clinicians or researchers, that was their first exposure. And
That was your dad's first exposure.
that was my dad's first exposure. He saw someone and became very curious and decided this is too powerful of a tool to leave to the entertainers.
Yeah, exactly. And one more thing I would like to highlight is that the difference between learning the way I was when I was young, and the way that therapists learn it on seminars and workshops. When you are a therapist, what I see in many people is kind of slight anxiety or hesitation because they feel responsible for many things, and they go, what if something goes wrong? What if I will not be able to do this? Or, kind of I will release something that I will not be able to cope them with. And when I was a child and we were experimenting, I didn't have anything like that. I was like, how much more crazy can we go? That was the attitude. So I'll give you an example. I was actually referring recently to my students. Well, when I was telling them about how I learned hypnosis, I actually read in Dr. Rossi's book, because then this friend of my mother's gave me the first Dr. Rossi's book. It was the Polish translation of Psychobiology of Mind Body Healing. And in this book, he was referring to the phenomena called the transduction of information. That the information transduces. You go, there's a thought, and then the thought transduces into neural activity, and then everything else deeper and deeper, and then back and forth. And this was the physiological level and neurobiological level. But I also thought to myself, well, the transduction of information can also go probably from symbolic to very precise. Like, for example, you can use metaphor and alter the symptom. Like, this is also a transduction of information. So I was like, can we use that phenomena? That was, I was like 16 or something. Can we use that phenomena to actually use one sense and convince someone that we are using the other? And the experiment that we were doing, 16 years old teenagers, was I put one of my friends in a trance, and then I played a music, and it was actually a very dark ambient music. It's a music that is designed to actually create anxiety and everything else like that, for that matter.
Horror music.
Sorry?
Horror music.
Something
Music for
like that,
horror
yeah.
films.
So I actually played him Lustmord, one of the Lustmord's song, and it was very dark and murky thing. And I said to him, being in a deep trance, that in a moment he's going to see something. So I didn't tell him that I'm gonna play the music. I just was curious, if I'm gonna play the music, but he's gonna be primed for seeing, will the music create an image? And when the music started playing, he went suddenly into a huge panic attack, and he was like trembling and everything, screaming and everything. And then he wakes up, and I put him out of the trance, and we take care of him. He was sitting there trembling with shivers, so he got a blanket and everything. And when he, almost 3 hours later, came into his senses and everything, he was like, whoa, that was cool. So normally, as a therapist, I would never do something like that, because I would think, because since I'm aware that those kinds of things can be traumatic or something like that. But when I was a child, that was like, whoa, that was interesting. Maybe another time we're gonna do something else like that. So the attitude was totally different. You were not afraid that something is gonna go wrong. You were just curious how it's gonna go and what's gonna happen, because you were not like, you didn't have all this burden that you are actually working with someone on something serious. Everyone there was actually to have to play with it, so that it was all just a joy. And even if someone was scared, it was like they were waking up, and it was like, it was better than the best horror movie I ever watched. So he actually saw many things there, and he was afraid of those things that he saw. So that's the difference. And so I think that the different attitude came from that, because I was able to kind of expose myself to deep trance phenomena pretty early, and then so I knew that it was possible to do those things, and then how to manage them somehow. So that's the other thing. The matter of attitude was also important.
Mhm. Amazing, really, that as you said, you were just playing with it, and your friends were understanding that.
Yeah, and we
So
were
it
all
wasn't,
children, so.
yeah, but they, I mean, they were just plain understanding that, and so there was informed consent,
Yeah,
actually, which is not what you think about, that a child is going to have informed consent from another child, but basically everybody knew what the deal was. We're just going to experiment here.
yeah. So,
And so even though some pretty wild things happened, that you got to do that with just incredible freedom. And I can understand even more now about how you think as a therapist, and also the tremendous breadth of information that you have about trance from having tried it with people.
yeah.
So like if something is not going in the direction that's going to be helpful for an actual client, like if they start shaking in fear, that may or may not be a good thing depending on what's going on. I've seen plenty of people in my office shake in fear, and it was part of the healing process.
Exactly.
But to be able to have that freedom is really huge. And then having the chance to really think it through of so with deep trance, that we start here and then we get here, and then once we get into the deep trance, which is something that that is a place that you like to go with people, that you have a lot of flexibility once you get there. Roxy, what do you think about all this?
Well, it reminded me initially when he was talking about how many of Dad's students learn their skills by channeling Erickson or imitating or, just kind of adopting what they saw and trying to replicate it. And that how much my dad would frown on that behavior. And so they wouldn't do it in front of him, or they wouldn't do it usually if they knew I was somewhere to observe. And so it went on amongst his students for years into their professional life, which really, kind of shocked me. Because somehow I viewed hypnosis, and I've realized more and more, I view it as an intrapersonal experience. And many, many professionals view the interpersonal to be far, far more powerful. And that's where they're trying to take on the attributes of somebody like Erickson, or trying to develop this power and this charisma. And that's definitely what you see in the cartoons and the stage musicians, is emphasis on the power and the charisma of the operator, with lesser emphasis on what's going on within the subject. But somehow I got the picture that this is all what happens within the subject. And as a young kid, I would say in my own way, I was equally reckless and exploratory. And I never told, in fact, I never told anybody, so this is true confession. Decades later, is I was always very fascinated with pain management. And so I got a pack of matches, and I was burning my skin to see if I could desensitize myself to the to the heat and everything. And I decided that wasn't strong enough of a negative feeling. And I ended up getting a cigarette and ended up making a serious cigarette burn on my leg, which I was effectively triumphantly able to manage the sensations. So I felt, on one level, I felt really proud of myself that I was able to prove that I can do it, I can go there, I can practice the skill set. But at the same time, there was this shame that I knew better than to injure my body in that way. And I ended up with a scar on my leg for years and years. It finally went away. But there was this cigarette burn right up in front of my shin. But the way I learned as a kid, I was brought up in a household where hypnosis was everyday discussion. It was expected that we would learn enough of a skill set to fit in our personal individual lives. I wanted to go into healthcare, but I was more interested in nursing than I was in psychotherapy. And one of the things that also became very interesting is the three of the four girls in our family. So I've got three sisters. So it's four girls and four boys. All four of the girls went into healthcare all four of the boys stayed out. So, but of the girls, there was three of us that became psychotherapists. And so I heard them working with clients. I heard audio tapes that they made. I heard saw demonstrations that they did. And one of the things that totally amazed me is that our voices, our technique, our cadence, what we arrived at was so similar you could scarcely tell which one of the three of us had made this audio tape. But when I transitioned from nursing into psychotherapy, one of the things that I made an active decision is I was always frustrated that Dad did as much indirection and you know, he didn't use his, when he was doing hypnosis, he wasn't on the cognitive conscious rational plane. He just skipped over that. And for me as a child, I found that very frustrating. And so I made a commitment for my own style that I'm going to cover all the bases. If I've got somebody that learns from, you know, cognitive conscious rational discussion, they're going to get, you know, there's going to be one thread going in there. And if there's somebody that learns from sensory input, whether it's visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, I'm going to cover that base too. And then I'm going to cover these indirect messages. And so for me, I kind of developed my own personal style of integrating the direct, the indirect, all of the sensory channels. And what I'm really aiming at is getting the subject, if I'm using hypnosis, I want to get the subject as deep into a hypnotic state as I can elicit, so that their inner work is done independently, individually, from resources within them, because my skill set is limited to the elicitation. So that's my story.
I mean, that's interesting that you would even use the word limited, Roxy, because I don't see you in this way. So when you describe indirect and direct and going with the cognition, going with the senses and all of that, and, you know, really covering all the bases, that I don't see how that could be limiting.
I think I'm using the word limiting because I'm an exterior force, I'm an external influence, and I believe that the locus of change is within the individual. So I can put forth all of the influence that I have available, but if the locus of change is in the individual, and it's either going to take or it's not going to take, and I've done my best, but I'm limited.
Okay, I definitely understand that. And also, I really enjoy this story of your rebellious nature. And because to me, that the thing that you really got to learn as a kid is you got to rebel against whatever you think the authority is. And for you to realize that the open-ended way that your father was, you know, so much with the indirection, and that you wanted a little more. And so when you, and I talked with your brothers and sisters, and they kind of said the same thing. They loved him dearly. But, you know, sometimes it'd be nice to have a little bit more direction, you know, like what college major should I choose? You know, I mean, there was some really practical stuff that was talked about, and he chose not to, interfere with that. He wanted you to come to your own way. So there's positives and negatives about that, but that it influenced your style of working, and into that you were going to add that within the context of therapy while still maintaining that the locus of control is within the client, or as your dad would say, the burden of effective responsibility is in the client. It's not within the therapist. So, I mean, it's like, good on you, you rebellious soul.
I've got one question to what you were saying. I understand that the road that you went, or your development, is actually incredibly interesting. But at the core of that, you said that what happened was, you said, I was frustrated that my father was using all that indirection. And from that came some of your decisions. And so that's how I understand it. And then you started developing all the other levels of communication and, working. But to me, there's one missing part here. Why was that frustrating? It's actually interesting question to me, because generally people say that you actually use indirect approach to avoid people frustrations and everything. So I go, that's interesting. He was indirect and you were frustrated. I need to know why.
Well, I think kids in particular need parental guidance. And neither of my parents, that wasn't how they approached it. Their approach was, we will inform you, we will tell you what our preferences are, but any choice or that you make needs to come from within you. And so they were very, very skilled at evading giving direct advice of any kind. And it was on us to, if we were interested in something, if we wanted to do something, it was kind of, well, how are you going to work that out? For example, I wanted to take music lessons, okay? And my parents' response was, well, where are you going to get an instrument, and what kind of instrument might you be interested in? And where are you going to go to get the lessons? And how are you going to pay for your lessons? And so it was treating me, kind of as an adult, a pal. When my kids say, I'm interested in taking piano, I'm like, I'm all over it. Okay. It's like on the street, I'm paying for the lessons. And even prior to them being expressing interest, I'm like, I think signing up for piano lessons is a good idea. And so I'm going to make all of the arrangements. But my parents were very hands-off in terms of the guidance. And so we all learned to navigate our own way. And fortunately for me, I was the 7th of 8 children, so I could look up at my older brothers and sisters and say, how do I figure out where to go to college, or what should I major in? Or, I'm thinking about going to the senior prom, and how am I going to manage, getting all the arrangements made? So I have the role models, but we never had the direct guidance that is very common and prevalent in our society, particularly in the upper middle class or well-educated, particularly in our social strata. That guidance just wasn't offered to us in that way. And I think kids need it. And I raised my kids with a lot of heavier hand than my parents did. And I feel like I made the right choice also.
Thank you. So now I've got my full picture. Thank you for it. Dr. Catherine Rossi, let's switch chairs for now, because you are leading the whole discussion, getting away with not talking about yourself. And I was actually planning on asking you first today this question, and suddenly you made it up. You to the point where you are the last person that is actually replying to a question, but I cannot wait to ask you, what's your story with?
Well, you two started as children, and for me, that I did not start learning hypnosis until I was almost, well, actually, I had my PhD, or I was real close to my PhD. And when I was first exposed to hypnosis, it was in graduate school. It was probably like a year before I got my PhD. And there was someone that came in there, a very enthusiastic person. And I think I remember the name, but I'm not going to say it. But it was somebody that was like high up in the hypnosis world, and who loved scripts. And so it was a, 10 weeks, 10 weeks, I forget what the classes were at the time in the quarter. And it was on scripts, and I hated it. And I said to myself, well, I'm never going to do hypnosis if this is what hypnosis is, because I don't want to follow someone else's script. I don't want to follow what someone else says. And then when I met Ernest, it was at an evolution of psychotherapy conference, and he was teaching some hand processes, very, very simple, problem in one hand, what's in the other hand, how, one hand goes down, the other hand goes down, and very, very simple. And I thought, okay, I like this. This is just asking questions. It's nobody's telling me what to do. And this is just asking and answering questions for yourself. And so I became very, very interested in it. And at the time I had a big problem to solve that I thought was going to take me a good 2 years to solve. It was really a deep, I'd received a deep psychological trauma, and I thought, well, it's going to take 2 years. Well, it took 2 weeks. With at home, following, anytime I had a chance to have a break, that I sat down and I did a process with myself. And I did that every day for 2 weeks, and then I was fine. So I got really interested in hypnosis in this way, but it was obviously, indirect, coming from me in this particular instance and following this pattern. So the important thing is, why did that appeal to me? This indirect way of working and basically asking questions and not knowing what the answers are going to be, because they're going to come not from the conscious linear mind. So I love nature. I'm in nature all the time. You've both been to my house. I live in nature. The loudest sound are the birds. You hear the ocean in the background. It's that I really love nature. Nature speaks to me. And I love, even though I explain noisy things like the ocean, noisy things like the birds, basically it's in silence. And so I like going to a place that has as few words as possible. This is what nurtures my soul. And when I was becoming a psychotherapist, and what they say about what we do is that this is talk therapy. You talk it out, which implies working with the linear mind. Well, I wondered, and this was way before I met Ernie, if it was possible to do a therapy with little or no words. And that was my question. So it's like the polar opposite of the way that you think about with psychotherapy. So when I met Ernest, and I never heard of Erickson the day that I met Ernest. I'd never heard of Ernest the day I met Ernest. So I didn't come with any preconceived notions whatsoever about this. In fact, I was really surprised to learn that, gee, Ernie's really, well known in the hypnosis world. I mean, it was because I loved him because I did. It's like, oh, well, this is a bonus, so it's not like I got together with him because of his intellectual work, because of his place in the world of psychotherapy. No, I just loved the man. I thought he was great. And then it went further and further and further. And as I'm scientifically minded, I always have been. So it's a little different than being strategic, but I want to know, what is truth? And how you're going to organize something within what is truth. So when I learned about chronobiology, and when I learned about the 4-stage creative cycle that is superimposed on chronobiology, the science of time, I said, yes, I now understand, first of all, when I'm going to go into that deep place where I can receive, which is trance. And so that I don't have to wonder. I know I can choose it 12 times a day. I just have to tune in. And so that's a place with no words, you see. And so when I'm working with a client, typically people talk for about the first 15, 20 minutes about this, that, and the other thing. They're getting organized to, sit in the chair and focus and, come to a place that's not in the outside world, but they're coming to the internal world. And I just kind of, we sort of do what we do, listen to the problem, listen to their life, whatever the heck that it is. And then all of a sudden there's a pause. And the pause, guess what? It's word free. The words stop. And it's like, okay, then the words have stopped. We're in a different consciousness right now. There's a chance to go within, and let's see what happens with that. And so obviously I'm explaining to you the science behind the indirect ways in which I work. But it comes from this, everybody I think loves nature, just about everybody loves nature. But for me, it's like the air that I breathe, the water that I drink, the ground that's underneath my feet, that it nourishes me. And people are really surprised at, how can you walk barefoot, on the road? How can you do this? I just love the feeling of the earth and the quietness of it. So then as time has gone on, I've continued to refine it. And Ernest almost always posed a question, almost always. Um, uh, uh, Occasionally he would say something direct, but not usually. And even within our relationship, he was always like asking the questions. He rarely told me what to do. He rarely was direct. If I asked him to be direct about something, he would be. But his natural way was to let me find my own way, and the people around him as well. So I think that probably helps you to understand, like, where I'm coming from. But as a child, I lived in a lot of silence. And after my father died at the age of 13, my mother sort of took a different track for about 20 years, where she was kind of taking care of herself. And although she loved me dearly, she did not take care of me. And so I was physically alone, all by myself, a good 6 months out of the year, without her even being on the property. They call it child abandonment today. But back then it was like, well, that's just the way that it is. And so I have to just enjoy the silence and tune into the silence. And so, because I do think that we become who we become by some of the things that have happened to us in childhood. So I didn't have parental influence in my teenage years. I didn't have an adult basically in my life during those teenage years. I needed to tune into myself, figure out what I wanted and how to get there. So fortunately, there was a freezer full of food when she would be traveling with her new husband. And I had a bicycle, and then eventually I had a car. And so I had food to eat, I had money, I wasn't destitute. I wasn't on the streets or anything like that, but I was, in fact, completely alone for long, long periods of time. And so I love silence, and I love to be able to tune in that way. And, so, one of the things that's true about me is that I'm unique because I had to figure it out myself. And I did. And I figured out that every day is a happy day, even if it isn't. You just have to look for the positive and find it. So during those years where other people would be just hideously lonely and angry and whatever, I was not. But the thing I could not do, I thought about it. I could not rebel because no one would see it. So I didn't get a chance to rebel. And I've had to figure out little ways here and there that I could do that, because I think it's important. But you could say by the life that I led back then, it was a total rebellion, because there wasn't anybody there to see it. Later on, I will say this. Later on, the last, I guess, 7, 8 years of my mother's life, we loved each other unconditionally. And she did not realize all those years what she was doing to me. As I made mention of it to her one time, and she said, well, wasn't I just away for 2 weeks? And I realized I'm not going to go there and hammer it home. It's like, if she wants to think that it was 2 weeks, let it go. It was years. It was not that. But the reason why I'm a really compassionate therapist, especially with people who have abandonment issues, it's like, yeah, been there, done that. And what are you going to do with it now? So, but it's, this silence, this indirect quality that's just part and parcel of who I am as a person. And as a result of all of that, what I spend most of my being is expressing love, of freely expressing love.
Deeply touching. So, I already know some of the parts of this story because you mentioned them to me when you were in Poland, when we were in Zakopane. So it was deeply touching then, and it's also touching now. And I'm thinking to myself, especially, when I'm listening to both of your stories, I'm thinking how much the actual story that we actually go through that is not associated with therapy or with hypnosis actually influences the choices that we then do, while actually choosing the orientation and everything to the way we are going to work with particular clients, how important it is. And actually, what incredible examples of utilization all those stories are, that we actually were, all of it came from something else. And then suddenly we decided, one way or the other, each of us decided we are going to go into the therapy thing, and suddenly all those things were utilized somehow to create our own unique styles that consist of all of these experiences and so much more. And also, I presume, techniques and technologies that we actually like and prefer. I don't know how accurate am I in this in this summary. Mm, mm,
I
So
think very accurate is that and the reason why the three of us are dear friends is that we get to be individuals. It's that we appreciate each other. I know I could send a client to either one of you and they would be very happy. For instance, that there would be no hesitation. And so I think for the listeners, in really tuning into yourself and what made you you, and what it is that you gravitate to, and does it feel true? Does it really nourish you? Does it make you that much more sensitive in working with people? And that the gratification when you work with someone that really gets what they need is, that to me is the celebration. And how they get there, whether it's through a very indirect style, whether it's through a style that, is a little bit more strategic, or, a style, Roxy's style, where she can be indirect and direct, within the same session. It's that we come as people who have puzzled through these things and appreciating who we are. And that's what I would like the listeners to be able to do, is to puzzle through, appreciate who you are and the style that you resonate with most.
exactly. What would you say, Dr. Roxana?
Well, I was just thinking how interesting it is that each of us saw the effectiveness of hypnosis in our own situation. That you, as a reckless kid, practiced on your friends and were wowed by what you saw. Catherine was older and more mature and better educated for the whole psychotherapy. And then having those hand processes that you learn from Ernest that were able to bring about rapid resolution in an effective way. And then my own situation of having been exposed to not only a multitude of different professionals who practiced hypnosis, but I was also exposed to the patients. And because my dad's waiting room was our living room, and becoming familiar with the patients, even when I was very young, it did not escape my notice that they come in depressed and, looking like the cat dragged them in or whatever. And then in a few weeks, they're standing tall and happy and frequently wanting to explain how Dad, with his magical hypnosis, has turned their life around. And so I got exposed to it over and over, that hypnosis has this potential. It is a tool that is practiced in a multitude of different ways and is effective. And so as a professional, it's my responsibility to navigate and find my own way, which is very different from your way or my dad's way. It's just very different. And that's kind of the fun. And teaching, the little anecdote that Catherine offered about in graduate school, somebody who at a script orientation, presented that this is the way you do it. Well, actually, that isn't the way you do it. That's one way of doing it, but there's a whole bunch of other roads to get there.
Yeah.
And our task as professionals, as healthcare professionals, is to serve the needs of the individual who are seeking our services.
Exactly.
Well said.
Well said. That's true. Okay, so I think we did it. We developed this the beyond the expectations I had, and as usual, so many more things came out, so many interesting anecdotes, and so many things to actually think on and digest, so to speak. So, well, I'll just gonna say to those who are listening, if you have any questions or want some answers from us, don't hesitate, leave us the comments below or send us an email, or don't hesitate contacting us anyhow you want. And to all of you, thank you very much for another great episode of our podcast. Incredible meeting, and see you next time.
Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Bye. Have a happy day.
This was another episode of our Experiencing Consciousness podcast. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Jan. You're the best. Be well, be happy, celebrate life.